The paradox of awakening. Spiritual awakening is often romanticized as a moment of blissful enlightenment, a transcendent realization that grants peace, clarity, and unshakable purpose. We see it in religious stories, mystic poetry, and New Age teachings as a point of no return, where illusion fades and truth reigns. Yet for many, the reality is far more complicated. Rather than feeling awakened and energized, people often describe a state of emptiness, detachment, or a complete lack of motivation after their awakening experience. Life seems drained of meaning, ambition disappears, and a once-driven individual may find themselves questioning everything. This condition can be jarring, especially after what is perceived as a profound spiritual breakthrough. Why does a person who has touched what they believe to be truth suddenly lose all desire to participate in life? Why does motivation vanish after such a significant inner shift? The answer lies within the psychological framework established by Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology. Through his extensive work on the self, the ego, and the process of individuation, Jung offered insights that are crucial for understanding the post-awakening void. Jung recognized that deep psychological transformation often precedes or accompanies spiritual experiences, and he warned that spiritual insight, without psychological integration, could lead to crisis rather than clarity. In this video, we will explore why the loss of motivation following spiritual awakening is not a sign of regression, but a predictable psychological transition. Using Jung's concepts of ego death, the shadow, the collective unconscious, and the journey toward wholeness, we will delve into how and why awakening disrupts our ordinary drives, and what lies on the other side of that emptiness. 1. Spiritual awakening, a psychological disruption. To understand the sudden drop in motivation that often follows a spiritual awakening, we first need to understand what awakening entails psychologically. In spiritual traditions, awakening is often described as a dissolution of the false self, a moment when one sees through the illusion of separateness and identifies with a greater whole. God, the universe, pure consciousness, or the self. From a Jungian perspective, this is akin to a rupture in the ego's control over the psyche. The ego, which Jung defines as the center of consciousness and our sense of I, is no longer the unquestioned ruler of the personality. Jung introduced the concept of the self as a greater organizing principle of the psyche, one that includes the conscious ego, but also the unconscious, instincts, emotions, archetypes, and transpersonal aspects. In many spiritual awakenings, a person catches a glimpse of this self. They realize that their identity is not limited to their name, profession, personality traits, or roles. This moment can be liberating, but it also destabilizes the ego's sense of direction and control. The ego, which previously drew motivation from cultural goals, success, status, relationships, etc., begins to lose its authority. In Jungian terms, this is a crucial and necessary disruption, but it creates a vacuum. With the ego's desires now exposed as superficial or empty, the individual may find themselves unsure of what to pursue next, or whether anything is worth pursuing at all. 2. The collapse of the ego and its desires. Motivation is traditionally fueled by the ego's ambitions to attain success, win approval, avoid failure, or satisfy desires. But in spiritual awakening, these drives often fall apart. The desires no longer feel relevant or meaningful. From a Jungian standpoint, this marks the beginning of the individuation process, where a person must journey beyond the ego into deeper layers of the psyche. Jung did not idealize the ego, but he saw it as a necessary function. We need the ego to operate in the world, form relationships, make decisions, and assert boundaries. However, when we identify solely with the ego, we become disconnected from the unconscious self. Awakening disrupts this identification and shows the ego to be a construct, important, but not ultimate. In this disillusioned state, old motivations wither. Why pursue career success if it now seems hollow? Why chase wealth if you've glimpsed the eternal? Why continue routines and obligations when they feel meaningless? Jung described this as a necessary dismantling. He wrote, "We are not what we seem, we are not who we think we are." This realization can lead to a form of existential paralysis. Without egoic desire, one feels unmoored, but Jung emphasized that this phase is not the end. It is the beginning of true psychological transformation. 3. The emergence of the shadow. Spiritual awakening doesn't just bring light, it also brings shadow. Jung's concept of the shadow refers to the parts of ourselves that we reject, repress, or deny. These may include traits like anger, envy, selfishness, trauma, guilt, or fear. Most people, guided by social conditioning, push these aspects into the unconscious, where they operate unconsciously and often destructively. However, when the ego weakens after awakening, the shadow can begin to surface. The individual who once thought of themselves as spiritually advanced or morally pure may now confront aspects of themselves they never wanted to see. This is often a shock. Jung believed that no true awakening or wholeness is possible without shadow integration. He stated, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Facing the shadow is emotionally exhausting. It undermines the spiritual high and replaces it with internal conflict. The psyche may become overwhelmed, and motivation to do anything, spiritual or mundane, can collapse. The illusion of spiritual superiority is shattered, and what remains is raw humanity, with all its contradictions." In this stage, the individual is not just unmotivated, they are facing their own unconscious. This can feel like depression, but it is more accurately a deep soul crisis, a confrontation with the parts of the self that must be acknowledged and healed for true growth to occur. 4. The death of external meaning. Another key reason for the loss of motivation after awakening is the collapse of external meaning structures. Before awakening, most people find purpose in societal roles and cultural narratives, career achievement, family life, religious identity, or national loyalty. These frameworks provide a sense of order, belonging, and direction, but spiritual awakening often shatters these foundations. One may realize that they've been living according to inherited values that no longer resonate. This realization is liberating, but also terrifying. The map is gone, the compass is broken, you're awake, but now directionless. Jung understood this phenomenon deeply. He often warned about the midlife crisis, where individuals begin to question the roles and beliefs that guided them in the first half of life. He wrote, "Thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life, with the false assumptions that our truths and ideals will serve us as hitherto." After awakening, an individual may feel like a stranger in the world. The systems around them, workplaces, institutions, even family structures, may feel empty or absurd. Without external validation or purpose, motivation dries up. But Jung would insist that this isn't a failure. It's the initiation into inner life, a movement from outer to inner authority. 5. Depression or initiation. Jung's view on the void. At this stage, it's easy to confuse what is happening with clinical depression, and indeed, the symptoms can overlap: lethargy, lack of interest, emotional flatness. However, Jung distinguished between neurotic depression and transformational despair. The latter, he argued, was not a pathology but a rite of passage. The emptiness after awakening is, in Jung's terms, a psychic death. The ego has died, or is dying, and the self has not yet emerged as a conscious guiding force. This in-between place is sometimes called the dark night of the soul, a concept shared by mystics, monks, and depth psychologists alike. In Jung's framework, the goal is not to escape this darkness, but to journey through it. He observed, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." The absence of motivation is not the problem, it's the symptom of something deeper, the soul's need for authenticity. This stage demands solitude, introspection, and patience. It is not about getting back to normal, it's about letting go of what is false to make space for what is true. 6. Individuation, finding meaning beyond the ego. If the ego is no longer the center of the psyche, what replaces it? Jung's answer is the self, the total integrated personality that includes conscious and unconscious elements. The process of becoming this self is what Jung called individuation. Individuation doesn't happen automatically after awakening. In fact, awakening is often just the doorway to the deeper work. Through dreams, symbols, creativity, therapy, solitude, and spiritual practice, one begins to discern the stirrings of a new kind of motivation, one not rooted in egoic ambition, but in inner necessity. This type of motivation is subtle but enduring. It may manifest as the urge to create, to serve others, to express truth, or to heal oneself. It does not come with applause or rewards, it is self-generated and self-sustaining. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. When the self becomes the guiding principle, motivation is reborn. But it looks very different. It is not urgent, anxious, or competitive. It is centered, deliberate, and meaningful. Life is no longer about proving oneself, it is about expressing oneself as authentically and fully as possible. Conclusion: trusting the descent. Losing motivation after spiritual awakening is not a mistake, nor a detour. It is a vital part of the deeper psychological transformation that Carl Jung spent his life exploring. The breakdown of egoic structures, the confrontation with the shadow, and the collapse of external meaning all create a temporary but necessary emptiness. Rather than resisting this stage, Jung would encourage us to trust the descent. The psyche is not breaking down, it is breaking open. The loss of motivation is a sign that the old self can no longer drive the ship, and although the new self has yet to take the wheel, it is awakening in the depths. This transitional space is not easy. It requires letting go of false identities, grieving lost illusions, and enduring the discomfort of uncertainty. But on the other side lies something extraordinary, a life that is guided from within, shaped by meaning, not by mimicry. A life where motivation is not a performance, but a reflection of inner truth. In Jung's words, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens.